Hi,
Oh,
Ronnie.
hi Andy.
How are you?
I'm fine. I can't hear the fan at the moment.
Ah, that's fine. That's fine. That's fine. It's on it, so that suits me fine.
No, it's really quiet. There,
Okay.
there was some noise earlier before I joined. I don't know what that was, but now,
That was the dog, I think.
now it's really quiet.
Yeah, that's fine.
So
It's
that's
it's
great.
basically a fan that's designed to go underneath a laptop to stop overheating. So I don't know why I didn't think of it before. It's only very low.
Oh right, because your laptop's got its own fan as well, but that's
Yeah,
obviously not.
absolutely. Yeah, I tried to host this from the computer. That's what I've been trying to do for the last half an hour or so. But my
Yeah,
microphone is so loud that it
yeah.
just drowns everything else out. Yeah, even like me moving my mouse or even breathing would be louder than you two speaking.
Yeah. Oh, so you can get fans that are actually separate
Yeah.
from, and so I didn't know you could
Yeah,
do that.
basically, I'll send a photo of it after the live, but it's basically just almost like a flat board that goes underneath your laptop, and the fans are all facing upwards. So they
Oh,
pump
I
air like
see.
basically into the inside of the laptop. Yeah, it's basically to stop them overheating. That's exactly what they're designed for.
That's an extra in case their own fan isn't
Yes,
doesn't do the job.
exactly that. Or on certain days, like for certain people that want to sit outside, say, and use their laptop in the garden, they're just not designed to be in direct sunlight and stuff. They'll overheat very quickly.
Oh no, that's that. Yeah, oh, that's handy. I didn't know you could get things like that. That's
Yeah,
that's
yeah, and it
that's
wasn't a
that's
lot of money. I
useful.
think I paid about £13 or something for it from Amazon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's handy. I mean, I hardly ever use my laptop for anything.
Well,
I
mine
use it.
broke
Yeah.
like last year when I was doing the documentary, so I haven't used my laptop for a long, long time. But yeah, this was still in the cupboard. On that note, I was going to ask Roger, do you know who runs A Candid Hominid? Just because they've never responded to my email, and I thought it was kind of it's quite important that they changed the incorrect date of birth for Leslie Cross.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure, actually.
Yeah, because I mean, I'm thinking it must be a year now. If it's a year since we did the modernisation of that essay, it must be a year since I emailed them to let them know that they got the date of birth wrong.
Because it was 19. Was it 1910 he was born?
Yeah, 1910, that's correct. Yeah.
And they've got
Oh,
1914,
yeah.
haven't they, I think.
1914, yeah.
Yeah.
It's Nathan Snyder, isn't it?
Yeah, I just wondered if you had like a contact for him because I mean, obviously the website still exists, but it hasn't been updated that I can see for a while. So it may just be that he pays the money, but he doesn't actually have anything to do with it really. Because it's
Yeah, I'll
only
have
a
a look.
tiny change. It's going to take a few seconds, but obviously it's quite important. And I'm sure that, John's probably not very happy about it either.
I'm just see if I'm friends with him, I suppose. Yeah, I'm Facebook friends with him.
Ah, brilliant. That's the only thing. I mean, the website's brilliant and I always recommend it to people. It's just the fact that it says 1914 and it should really be 1910.
The last post was the 23rd of June.
On Facebook, I was still around on there at least.
Yeah. Now, I'm going to have to change my system here because I'm actually blasting myself out with my
Hey.
headphones here. So hang on a second.
But yeah, for anyone that's just joined, we are potentially up to 1954 in our timeline, and we'll be reading from The Surge of Freedom today. Is at least my favourite Leslie Cross essay. I mean, I think it's most people's, but it's definitely mine. I was
Right.
interested though.
Can
Are
you
we
hear me
reading?
again?
Are we reading from the original? Or are we reading from the modernised version?
Yeah, there's a question.
Because I've got both up, so I don't mind.
Yeah, well, I've just got the original, and it's interesting because it's from the 10th edition of the Vegan, isn't it?
Yes,
Or the 10th anniversary.
10th anniversary. I mean, yeah, 10th
Yeah,
anniversary edition. Yeah.
that's right. Yeah. So
It's winter, I think. Winter 54, is that right?
yeah, Winter
Yeah.
54, Volume 9, number 3, and it's over 3 pages. But it from what we said in the previous shows, it took them 10 years to get their act together in terms of the philosophy, which is interesting. And I think that, well, if you think about placing this particular essay, this one is the last substantive philosophy essay that I know of. I don't know if there's anything else after this.
No.
There's a talk to the vegetarians after this, but not an actual essay, right?
No, you've got more. I mean, well, maybe I suppose you could say "Out of the Dust of War" is maybe an essay that's in that book. with Eva Bat and a few others, where it's like a collection of essays. That would be the only one that you could say is anything like it. I mean, that's quite short and it's written it for someone else's book. But I suppose it's the only one that you could even say is anything like it. Yeah, the others no.
Yeah. So from my point,
there's one more that I found as well that I've narrated called "Veganism Defended," which isn't on A Candid Hominid, which again is just kind of like a short extract that he wrote for The Vegan.
All right, I don't think I've ever seen that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's for some reason it's not on A Candid Hominid, but it's a Leslie Cross piece that was in. I think it might be 59, 58, 59, something along those lines. And yeah, I've narrated that. It's very short. It's only about 4-minute narration.
Yeah. So I tend to think that The Surge of Freedom is the final statement from Cross about what veganism is.
Yeah.
And it seems as though there's been an evolution of ideas over the years. For example, when they first started this process, they were still struggling with the ramifications of being non-dairy vegetarians. And then they seem to have this thing where Watson said something about we've got to eliminate all products of the slaughterhouse. So that seemed to be a bit of a scope at one point. And then Cross introduced things like hunting and vivisection and all that kind of stuff, right? And so this goes back to this idea that the idea of veganism just gets bigger and bigger and bigger as they think it through.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it just falls back into what we talked about last week, that it's just logic being extended at the end of the day and being consistent. If you oppose this for this particular reason, then it makes sense that you also oppose this for the same reasons. And then when you realize that, you're just going to keep going, to be honest, when you realize that all these things are essentially related.
I find it interesting that he's got a little section at the beginning and then it's separated by asterisks.
Yeah.
And then it goes into things. But it seems to me that anybody with a fair mind would see that the reducitarian vegans who talk about veganism and have nothing to do with humanity, that's just knocked completely out of the water by this essay, which is the final philosophical essay from Leslie Cross.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean those asterisks are copied directly as it is in The Vegan as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And so even the first sentence, this is an attempt to state in simple terms what veganism is and why and how it came into existence, and to suggest what it could mean for mankind or humankind, as we would say now.
We put humanity on ours, but yeah.
Yeah, and so that's a remarkable thing to say, in the sense that it seemed to me that if you were to talk about the interest in humanity as being part of the scope, Cross wasn't kind of frightened to talk about the scope before we talked about the focus.
No, absolutely not. And just before we move on anyway, just replace the word veganism a moment with something like pescatarianism. Let's say we were talking about a diet for a moment. That makes no sense whatsoever, that sentence. This is an attempt to state in simple terms what pescatarianism is and why and how it came into existence, and to suggest what it could mean for humanity. Well, nothing. Nothing. So if we were just talking about a diet or food, none of these essays would exist. It really is that simple. Why bother? Is there a philosophy behind the keto diet? No.
Yeah, well, I think they moved away from diet pretty quick, didn't they?
Yes, and I mean that was poignantly said in the last essay. I can't remember if it's defined or whether it's the Constitution, but when Cross says, we're a long way from non-dairy vegetarians, a long way, and they are a huge way away from it.
Yeah, that's the Constitution. And then he goes on to talk about the size of veganism in their minds. I sometimes think that people don't appreciate the kind of vastness of the idea from their point of view. And so he talks about the word veganism is a symbol that stands for a major change, a mutation. And so the mutation bit is part of their talk about evolution. right? Comparable to the freeing of the serfs and the freeing of the slaves. So, I mean, they're talking about a big deal here.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then this is the bit I find interesting about this. And I did a YouTube thing years and years ago when I was first thinking about these. And I was taken by this next paragraph because he says its official definition, the doctrine that man or humanity should live without exploiting our fellow animals, is accurate, precise and comprehensive, but not always fully understood. So I thought, well, that's an interesting idea. And then he says, but that's not surprising because they've tried to condense this vast idea into 9 words.
Mm-hmm.
And so in some senses, that's kind of like an impossible thing to do. But it basically means that if you took those 9 words as the definition, you're missing out on everything else that surrounds it.
Yeah.
You know, it's almost, again, it's a reducitarian thing to do. Because he actually says, you know, it's a reform so massive, and it's kind of size of it is going to bring about a new world, and it's going to bring about a new humanity in that new world. So to try to bring that down to 9 words is totally impossible.
Yeah.
So it's also disingenuous then to use those 9 words and say this is all that veganism is.
Absolutely. I mean, even with the changes that we made to it, it's still is very basic for what it is.
Yeah. So how did we express it in the new version then?
We changed it to the doctrine that humanity should live without exploiting or oppressing other animals.
Ah, right. Okay.
Which would obviously encompass a lot more potentially than the original words do, but still doesn't encompass anywhere near what veganism looks to solve.
And it would suit Ronnie because, you know, Ronnie, you're a bit concerned about the limitation of the word exploitation, aren't you?
Oh yes, because there are many ways in which other animals are harmed or perhaps negatively impacted by humans that aren't exploitation.
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it briefly in the last one. Things like forest fires, for example, are absolutely oppressing other animals, but they're not exploiting them. So that's, absolutely.
Yeah, and so and it wouldn't make sense for someone to be opposed to the exploitation of other animals, but not.
Yeah, I mean, to give that example, it would be absurd, wouldn't it, to be opposed to, say, fishing, but not be opposed to water being contaminated.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. When you know that the contamination of that water, because say somebody didn't care, say somebody just wanted to, and when we have this problem at the moment in the UK with the water companies, where there's a lot of human effluent being allowed to go into the rivers because they're more interested in profits than, you know, private companies interested primarily in profits, and so they cut corners. And obviously effluent going into the rivers is killing, you know, life in the rivers, killing other animals that live in the rivers, and that is an example of oppression of other animals through human behaviour, isn't it?
Yeah.
And surely as vegans we would be, you know, we would be concerned about it. It wouldn't make sense to not be concerned about that when we're concerned about other ways in which humans harm and kill other animals. Although I would point out that the main cause of the pollution of our rivers isn't actually effluent, human effluent. It's animal farming and the runoff from animal farming. That's the number one reason. But nevertheless, the problem of human effluent in the rivers is really considerable.
How do you deal with the common pushback to that, Ronnie? Which is, let's say a vegan went on a world cruise on one of those big polluting boats.
Yeah,
that in itself doesn't amount to a rights violation.
Yes, but it's not. But to me, it's not. Well, I think the overall behaviour of our species, you know, results in the rights of other animals being violated, even if like it's not a one-on-one situation where somebody's like directly harming another animal. Nevertheless, the human conduct is causing that harm, is causing the death and suffering of the animals, and we're still responsible for that. I mean, we know about the huge amount of pollution caused by cruise ships. I mean, we know about the the considerable impacts on the climate, the considerable contribution towards the climate crisis of the aircraft industry. And so I think as vegans, we need to avoid contributing to that.
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. I mean, at the end of the day, there might not be any direct
do we need to go on
correlations, but
cruises?
exactly that. Do we need to do it? It would
Do
be
we need to go on cruises?
consideration.
There are beauty spots in the UK all around us where we can go and have a pleasurable time.
I've got one myself.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, absolutely.
I mean,
And where I live, we've got
literally 10, 15 minutes away. I've got somewhere that I can go that is like my happy place that hardly anyone else goes to. Absolutely. I don't need to get on a plane to do that.
Yeah, we've got a lovely forest, very, very near here, for instance, along with many other places.
But no, I think that really plays into that when we have this hypothetical tossed at us about what would we do in a vegan world. I think what you've just kind of said really touches on it as well. Even these situations where there might not be a direct rights violation involved, because the mindset of everybody is shifted to consider others. It's like, hang on a minute, the fact that there's a risk that this could happen, is it worthwhile? Probably not. Completely different way of looking and considering others.
Yes, I think that's right, and I think that by just being here on this planet, we are going to have an impact on the other animals that share this planet with us. We need places to live. We need to grow food, and all that will impact on other animals. The space where we build our houses, at one time that would have been a space, inhabited by other animals. So we are going to have that impact, but we've massively overstepped in terms of the impact we have on other animals, so that it's no longer just. It's miles away from being just, and so we need to make every effort to really minimize the impacts, the negative impact we have on other animals, and to me that's all part of the vegan ethic.
I think we'd agree with that.
Absolutely.
Now, Andy, I've got something to ask you. Well, both of you, obviously, but the next bit of the essay, I wonder whether we could wonder whether it's controversial, because he's talking about the doctrine, and he said the doctrine that humanity should live without exploiting our fellow animals. That's my slight update, not quite as much as yours. But so he then says, well, why should we not exploit our fellow animals? And then he says, so why did we formulate this doctrine that we shouldn't, right? Mm-hmm. And then he says, the final but not the immediate answer, which is quite an interesting way of putting it, is the revealing one, for it demonstrates the truth of the claim that veganism is not a mere side shoot in human evolution, but a central extending growth of considerable significance. But is he not saying that we should not exploit our fellow animals for us, for our benefit?
Yes, I guess to some degree. I mean, it goes back to when he was talking about the greater benefit being to the slaver than the slave, right? Because I suppose, again, it's from the sort of outside, that seems absurd to think about. But I suppose in terms of, so to say they can say a pig, for example, if you granted them their freedom, most other things about their life would stay very similar, I suppose, apart from like the freedom aspect, whereas a moral shift of all of humanity would change every aspect of every industry that exists on this planet. It would change everything about how we live, how we work, how we act, how we respond to one another, everything. All of our things would need to be rewritten. All of our laws would have to be scrapped. It's fucking significant. Yeah.
Well, my answer to the question that I posed, following on from Cross's question, really, is that I think by this stage, 1954, it's just a given for Cross. Well, of course, animal liberation is what we're about. That's our main thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's a given for them, and so he then said, "Well, let's turn our attention to the things that would be a consequence of animal liberation." And so I think he's not frightened just to kind of focus on the scope.
Yeah, and obviously, again, we have to remember that this was an essay prepared and written for vegans. He's not trying to convert these people to care about other animals. He knows they do.
Yeah, that's right. And so it's
like,
kind of like,
me speaking to you guys. I've not got to sort of spread this message, have I? You're already on board with it. It's just, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of right. Okay, we're all on board with that. But then these are the extras.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. It seems, which is pretty good, I think. And then he talks about.
And I mean, again, this next line is sort of like, if you ever considered veganism to be a diet and nothing else, veganism owes its birth to the fact that at its deepest point within us, we believe impregnably in freedom. How's that got to do with diet? In any way, shape, or form? Nothing.
Search me.
Nothing. Nothing. He couldn't even contrive that that's diet related. So yeah, just certain lines that are just like, how can you think this?
Yeah, then there's a bit of a jingoism in the next line, which is a bit unfortunate. But he talks about Britain being freedom-loving island.
Well, we obviously cut out that bit out in our version.
We did, didn't we? Yeah,
because it's kind of like, it's very dated now.
Yeah, it does seem pretty weird. And then he talks about living our lives in our way. And again, I think the assumption is that, well, I don't need to keep repeating the fact that we're animal liberators because everybody knows that, right? And so they don't need to keep just reinforcing that all the time.
No, and I mean, that paragraph is, even though it's from 54 and it's 70 years ago, we're still having these same conversations. We're still having to challenge these same misnomers and sort of this propaganda. Like, it is still seen as a restriction, isn't it? People will still go, you can't have milk. No, we won't have milk. It's nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's actually read that one out and then talk.
Yeah, I don't want to read it. So, freedom to live our own lives in our own way, according to our own inward light, is fundamental to our view of life itself. It is in the light of this concept that we find the true significance of the vegan reform. Only when we see it as a doctrine, not of restriction, as those who oppose it mistakenly believe, but of freedom, do we fully comprehend it.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I did see a meme, though, the other day. It must be about 3 days ago, where it was a big list of it was a big list of no's, no flesh, no milk, no, there must have been about 50 things, right? And I was thinking, well, people from the outside would look at that and think, wow, how restricted is that?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think the way that we express this idea can be good or bad. And by focusing on the good things about veganism, the pros part of it, I think is an advantage to talking about the things that we don't do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, just out of interest, did you two ever see this essay like handed around in print and stuff? Because obviously it was still being listed as vegan material well into the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, it was kind of sold or given, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's why I wondered if ever, like, during outreach or anything like that, anyone ever like handed it out or talked about it.
I've never seen it. What about you, Ronnie?
No. I mean, I think probably because I became vegan in 72, which is like 18 years after this, isn't it?
Yeah.
And of course, vegan outreach back in those days wasn't really a thing. I mean, vegan outreach in any really considerable way has only been perhaps 25 years. That's it's only been going that long. So we're a long time away from when this when this was published.
Yeah, but at the same time, Ronnie, you went vegan pretty early, 72, and it wouldn't have been kind of a rare thing for people to give each other kind of essays.
That's what I was thinking in regards to like
leaflets.
Yeah, so I didn't experience that myself. Whether there were other people who were vegan at the time experienced that, I don't know.
Then again, I suppose it would never have been the surge that people handed out anyway. Really,
Well, if it was available, somebody must have done it, surely.
I mean, obviously, the fact that they made a point of saying you can have this material off us on every issue for, I don't know, over a decade tells me that people must have been taking it.
And it wouldn't have had any illustrations. It'll just be text, wouldn't it?
It would have just been text, yeah. It would have just been probably like a double-sided flyer or something that had been typed out.
Yeah. So by the time you think about the 1980s, you wouldn't be able to give people just.
No, that's very true. Actually, yeah, no one would want that, would they?
No, you'd have to have pictures.
I think if you were kind of doing outreach as well, the sort of thing you'd give to ordinary members of the public would probably need to be somewhat different than that. And we've got to remember that the average reading age of people in the UK is just is 9 years old.
Yeah.
And so, anything that's kind of too wordy or too complicated, like a lot of people are either not going to understand it or they're not going to bother to read it. So you've got to kind of word things in a way that, is more likely to reach people. And something that's very wordy like this wouldn't be, if I was way back, I mean, I often, like to imagine that I'm back, I'm back when I first became vegan, because I think if I had my time again, I would get into outreach way back then, and encourage the Vegan Society to do, like outreach on the streets and stuff like that, and at community events. And the sort of material that I'd advocate they would produce wouldn't be like that. It would be something that's much easier for people to read and understand.
Yeah.
Well, begs the question: do you think, Ronnie, that that even the members of the Vegan Society would struggle with Cross's essays, because he was a journalist, right? And so I wonder whether the particular way that he wrote was a bit of a hindrance to his establishing the philosophy, and in some ways why it took so long or something like
that. It may have been. I mean, like it probably would have been good if he could, I've still written what he wrote there, but then also produced some other stuff that was
a bit more basic and a bit more simple.
Yeah,
I was going to ask as well, and I suppose I might as well ask it now. But I won't name who. But Roger, you said that someone couldn't get over the bit about like the slaughterer knife. Would you not think there might have been other people in the Vegan Society that read this the first time and thought, "What is he talking about?" Especially with like the, it being a bigger difference for the slaver than the slave. Some of those things. You not think that possibly the first time they were read, people are like, "What the hell is he talking about?" Or do you think that they had such good communication that they were all on the same page?
Well, it's bound to be a mixture, isn't it? I mean, there's bound to be people who go, "What the heck is this?" And others going, "Oh, I see what you mean." And then others still who would probably need to read it again, in the same way as one of the main things about the case for animal rights from '83, which is a lot later than this, is that people say you've often got to read bits of it 3, maybe 4 times.
At least, yeah, true.
Yeah, and so there is this thing, sociologically, we talk about things like recipient design, which is designing your communication with the people who are going to receive it in mind. Well, there's not a lot of evidence in this that there's a lot of that going on, unless it was just naturally assumed that everybody would be of a standard of educational attainment where this wouldn't be a problem.
Well, yeah, this is what makes me think if this was listed as like material that you could say, hey, can I have 10 copies of The Surge of Freedom? They must have considered everyone was able to understand it.
Yeah, but I wonder why they never thought about making shorter leaflets or even what we would now call memes out of this stuff.
I don't know. I'm not really
It must
sure.
have just not been in their mindset,
Yes,
like
it's not
Ronnie
thought
was
about it, I
saying.
suppose. I mean, I suppose when we factor in everything else that they'd have had to think about and organise, and taking into consideration the timing of everything, it's not like they can just chuck everything on a Google Drive or whatever and share it amongst people. I suppose everything's still very difficult and very limited. We're still talking about everything having to be hand typed. I mean, I don't know when the first photocopier came out or the first ability to copy something, but I don't think it was anywhere near then.
Well, I think they're printing it at this stage. But I think the actual answer is what Ronnie said, is that they weren't really thinking like campaigners.
No, that's true.
That's what I think it was.
No, and I think that had an element, a campaigning element, being injected at that early stage, and people started doing like community outreach. I think that we'd be much further on in terms of.
We need to get you a time machine, Ronnie.
Yeah, I'd love to be able to go back in a time machine, because I think that would be that it would change a hell of a lot. Because, you know, even when the animal rights movement kind of sort of really got going in the 1970s, you know, like as we've said many times, there was nobody or hardly anyone at all campaigning for veganism. Everyone was campaigning on various single issues, weren't they? Nobody was campaigning for veganism. There was really no outreach. And I think had outreach started way back then and started, you know, in at a community level, we'd have far more vegans now, and veganism would be far more advanced now than it is.
Yeah, well, obviously, if you know, if veganism became the moral baseline of the animal welfare movement, that would have helped. It's just, you know, the single issues didn't help either. So there's lots of little anchors in the history of our movement, really, when you think about it.
Yes, and I think that, you know, the use of, for instance, there's this use of so much of cruelty by vegans today, as if to say, go vegan because, you know, the farming of other animals is cruel, you see. Whereas the fundamental reason for being vegan isn't because farming's cruel, although very, very often it is. The fundamental reason is because those animals have been exploited and killed. You know, that's the fundamental reason, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a culture clash.
And so, but the cruelty, this kind of obsession with cruelty, kind of goes way back, and it goes way back to the single issues, because it was really strange that when I went vegan, it wasn't anything to do with cruelty. I didn't really know, you know, about factory farming. I didn't know how animals were slaughtered or anything like that. I did know they were killed, and that was why I went vegan, because I thought, why are we killing all these animals when we don't need to? It's obviously wrong, and that's why I went vegan. But then as soon as I got involved in single issue campaigning, like anti-hunt campaigning, anti-vivisection campaigning, the main word used then was cruelty. It was all about cruelty. Mm-hmm. You see, so that goes way back. This kind of focus on cruelty goes way back to those single issue campaigns,
and that's where we've got cruelty free from as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I, even though the fundamental wrong that they were dealing with was also the persecution, exploitation, and the killing of other animals, and that happens with hunting. It happens with, you know, someone who experiments on animals could claim, oh, the animals feel no pain, they're anaesthetized when we do the procedures, and very often they're not, and we know there's massive suffering involved, but someone doing it could claim, no, my experiments are perfectly humane, there's no suffering, and when the animals are killed at the end of it, they don't feel anything. Right? Well, that would still be wrong.
Do you remember that time when you were really angry with me when I was part of AR Zone and we interviewed Colin Blakemore? Do you remember that?
Oh, yes.
and what Blakemore said, because he was like, I think he was opposed to hunting, he was opposed to circuses, as opposed to zoos and everything. So he sounded half like an animal advocate, but then he was also a vivisector. But
Yes.
his argument was based on cruelty. He said that he took kittens and he put them to sleep, then did experiments on them, and then killed them, so that there was no cruelty involved.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. And
Because
so,
the focus, yeah.
yeah.
The
So
focus
again,
of the
we're back,
anti-vivisection movement.
yeah, we're back to that. You say, well, you're cruel. You go, well, they're asleep. I'm not being cruel.
Yeah. That's the problem. And if you base your opposition to what humans do to other animals on cruelty, then you have to constantly be proving that it's cruel. And this is what's happening now, sort of with the vegan movement. There's all these there's all these farms claiming to have high welfare standards, and then what's happened, there's this repeated investigations into those farms to prove that the standards of welfare aren't high and there is cruelty involved, right? But if you base your opposition, if your fundamental opposition to what's happening to those animals is because they're being exploited and killed, you don't need to do all those investigations.
Well, I mean, like I was about to say, like just to
Yeah.
take, say, Animal Rising's most recent campaign. If your
Yeah.
campaign is we oppose animal use, right? You don't need to visit a farm.
No.
You can just say it because you know they exist. We don't need to go there and video anything, right? Our position
exactly.
is animal use, not animal cruelty. Exactly as you say. If you say our position is animal cruelty, we need to go and evidence the fact that it definitely is cruelty.
All the time.
Nobody's going to argue with animal use.
You have to do it all the time, because as soon as you get a farm claim, no, our animals are treated wonderfully, and when they're sent off for slaughter, they don't know about it, don't feel anything. If they make that claim, then immediately what happens? Someone has to go and investigate to prove that that's not true, because the desire is to prove cruelty. But you see, I've had farmers say to me, "Oh, come and visit my farm, and you can look round and see how wonderfully I look after the animals." And I say, "I don't need to see your farm. Let me ask you something. Do you send your animals for slaughter?" And the farmer goes, "Well, yes, of course I do." I said, "Well, then I don't need to go to see your farm, because I already know what you're doing is wrong, and it's that's what's wrong about what you're doing, is that these animals are going to slaughter. You're exploiting them. You're taking their lives. You don't need to see what conditions you keep them in."
Yeah, well, of course, the focus on conditions and treatment in the movement now is wrapped up with the RSPCA, because one plank of the argument is that they're convincing the public that there's no cruelty, and so the activists are upset that the public are being misled, aren't they?
Mm-hmm. But if we maintain that our position was animal use, then nobody's being misled. They're just choosing to ignore it, and we can go back to having a proper conversation again. Yeah,
absolutely. And then the other problem is cultural. And again, as a sociologist, because when vegans say the word cruel, they don't mean the same as when the mainstream plus the RSPCA say the word cruel. And so for the mainstream, it's quite possible to have non-cruel use. In fact, animal welfare ideology promises that. That's a promise of it. It says, don't worry, we can make the use of them non-cruel, so everything's grand, right? From a vegan point of view, but they're still using the same word, they're going, there's no such thing as non-cruel killing, for example. But that's a contradiction of the mainstream way of understanding these words. And so if vegans want to challenge the dominant understanding of the word cruelty, then that's got to be done in a very careful way. There's no point in just accusing people of being cruel, because that just causes confusion, because they've always been told that they're not cruel because of X, Y, and Z. And then you've got a vegan coming along and saying, well, you're cruel or you're an abuser. And that just throws the conversation off. And it seems to me that at the point when the education should start or the conversation should start, that's when it all gets closed down, because, there's been insults being traded one way or another by then. And so it seems to me not to be a very effective way of educating someone. Because if you want to get them to reevaluate the definition of a word that they fully understand, and everybody around them fully understands, and it's only the vegans who are out of step with that, then that means that we've got a hell of a lot of work to do, right? My opinion is, well, let's not even get there. Let's talk about what we want to talk about in the first place, which is animal rights.
Well, yes, or to talk about what the fundamental wrong is, which is the exploitation.
Just very quickly, do you not think that problem is exacerbated massively by huge amounts of these people that are now using exactly the same language as speciesists are using an animal rights slogan or refer to themselves as an animal rights activist, because it further promotes that dilution. So they're animal rights in terms of their branding and their name and what they represent, but they're animal welfare in terms of their words, their actions, their claims making.
It's a major problem.
So what does animal rights even mean anymore?
I think one of the difficulties is perhaps you could argue that, when we're talking about, vegan campaigns, what we're often talking about is campaigns that focus on the on the killing of other animals for food, basically, and mostly it's on animal farming, isn't it? And I'm wondering if in the sense that has in itself become a single issue. And so, like I said earlier, that the single issues in terms of animal experiments, in terms of hunting, and in terms of like zoos and circuses and all these things, have traditionally focused on cruelty, haven't they, rather than use, rather than on exploitation. And whether because you've got now this that the campaigning, say, against animal farming has in itself, in a way, become a single issue, that is also focusing on cruelty as well.
So it's an interesting one in the sense that if we want to move the argument on, it's difficult to do it by using language which is going to get you into this kind of muddy quagmire, because you're talking essentially when vegans talk to non-vegans about cruelty, they're talking at cross purposes, because they're using the same word, but it means different things to the parties, and so there's miscommunication all the time, and then so when the vegan ends up accusing the non-vegan of being cruel or being an abuser, that's just an insult at that stage.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the education's gone.
Yeah, it's far better.
It's difficult, I suppose, to shift away from that. I mean, say you had two people stood next to each other in the street. One of them was just a bug standard non-vegan that liked dogs and cats, and the other one was a vegan activist. And they weren't wearing a vegan t-shirt or anything like that. And both those people were stood there holding a sign saying "End animal cruelty." How would you know who the vegan was? What is it that actually says, "Hey, this is why we're vegan. This is what's different about us"? Nothing. It's exactly the same message as the person that's perpetuating animal cruelty. But we don't recognise this stuff. I mean, you look at most of the protests over the last few months that have kind of stood outside RSPCA premises, and all the signs say all the same things that all my old dog rescue friends used to campaign against, while still consuming and using animals every single day of their lives. How are we expecting people to know that we're different if we use the same words, the same claims, and say the same things?
Well, I think the answer is that we don't mean it that way.
No, we don't. I understand that every time that I have a conversation with someone, that their interpretation of the word cruelty includes all these other things. Absolutely. The same with like abuse includes all these other things. But the problem is, as you mentioned earlier, the vast majority of people who were once upon a time us have had this kind of idea built in their head for decades sometimes, that the RSPCA and Red Tractor and other groups actually prevent that from happening. So that there's a massive kind of like stumbling block there. you're trying to use language that they've had sort of thrown at them all their lives to convince them that these things are done in the right way.
Well,
And now
it's still what the RSPCA are pushing back against these campaigns on the grounds that, okay, so you've shown that our scheme isn't that good, but things would be worse if we weren't doing it at all.
Absolutely, yeah. And again, the messaging is, well, we'll do it better then. We'll continue to exploit, we'll continue to use, but we'll improve our scheme, or we'll improve our monitoring or our investigations or whatever. You don't come away from looking at any of these things and think, hey, the problem is animal use. You come away from these things and think, hey, the problem is that pigs are being put in gas chambers, or that chickens are being kept in too small crates, or any of those things. That's what the idea is left implanted in your head, because that's what the signs say and that's what the messaging says. I mean, literally, like we were mentioning, you don't need to go and look at all these farms if you make it clear that what we oppose is exploitation and use. You only have to go and investigate farms if you keep telling people that what we oppose is cruelty, and you have to back it up with evidence.
Yeah, we've almost backed ourselves in a corner, haven't we, really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a case. I think as to attract people's attention, I think maybe some of the footage taken on these investigations would do that, but you wouldn't have to have so many. And
no,
you
and the claims making on that film could be much different as well. So, like, what they could do is they could go to one of these farms, because obviously I'm assuming when they do their investigations, they must have farms that aren't as bad as others, for example. I mean, they're all going to have rights violations in them, but obviously some are in much better standards than others. So what they could do is they could show some of the really bad footage. Then they could show some of the good footage, and they'd say, look, no matter what kind of treatment it has, or no matter what the welfare conditions are, that's not the problem. We've seen the worst and we've seen the best, but none of them are okay. Why can't that be your claim?
Well, it's because a lot of it is based on moral shocks.
Mm-hmm. But you could still provide the moral shocks, right, with the horribleness, but just change the messaging about it by saying, even if this wasn't the case, even if this was perfect, it's still wrong. It's still immoral. It's still oppression. It's still exploitative. Like, that should be your message. You can still use those emotional, I can't believe how bad this one place is, but your messaging's different.
Yeah, we did, because you know, my local vegan group, we do video adverts on social media, and it's something we started during the lockdown. We couldn't get out and about, and it proved to be very successful. So we still do it, not as much, but we still do it occasionally. And I kind of look at the internet and find videos to use and edit them and everything. And I remember there was one we did about hens, about the exploitation of hens for their eggs. And it was this video that showed them all in the battery cages, which is the majority of hens used for eggs are in battery cages. And it showed all this and the terrible conditions and everything. And then it said so don't buy eggs, go vegan and all that. But I thought, well, what someone's going to do is look at that and think, oh well, what I'll do then is make sure the eggs I buy aren't from battery hens. So I had to add stuff at the end saying even with free range hens, you get the killing of the male, the male chicks at a day old, and even with free range hens, the hens are the hens themselves are killed at a fraction of their natural life. I kind of had to add that on, otherwise people, a lot of people would look at that and what they come away from isn't to become vegan, but to go and buy free range.
Yeah, that's always a problem. Now, can I make a suggestion, guys? Because we've got about 10 minutes before we're supposed to switch to questions. So if we spend this next 10 minutes finishing off with Leslie, and then...
We've digressed.
Because the chat has been quite active, so we can scroll back and answer some of the questions from there in the last half an hour. The next thing in terms of the essay that we're looking at this is really quite interesting, because he talks about the periodic surges. So this is where the title comes from, the surge. of freedom. So he said this is the last or the next one of these surges of freedom kind of thing. And he says, but this one is special because we're taking the idea of freedom and we're putting it over the species barrier, which is great, because that's what Reagan argued, that he was trying to get the concept of rights over the species barrier. These people were trying to get the idea of justice and freedom and liberation over the species barrier. And so that's what eventually led them to believe that veganism was rather more advanced than lots of other causes, because it covered more types of exploitation, and it stood for liberation on a wider front. And so both Cross and Watson, both towards the end of their lives, they developed this thing that veganism was rather special as a movement because it did more than other movements. And that was kind of like, well, to put it into the context of what you were saying before, Ronnie, it's almost like, well, those movements, they're single issue movements. We're not, we're vegans, right? And so I always thought that was a pretty neat way of putting it. And then one bit that I always point out, just because I feel duty bound, is he says, until the advent of veganism, comparatively few people regarded our fellow animals as being either worthy of or entitled to the right to be free, and probably fewer, and then he makes the point about the effect on humanity again. But he was talking and writing many years before the case for animal rights. And so the idea of the division between legal rights and moral rights probably didn't really occur to them back then. Because, of course, we would say that our fellow animals, they have rights, not that they deserve them, or not that they're entitled to, but they already have them. And the problem is, not that they don't have them, it's that the fact that the rights that they have are not respected. Okay, so the rights that they don't have, and they need to be given, if you like, are legal rights, but they already have moral rights.
Yeah.
And so that's always a point. And I still see quite a lot of modern activists kind of getting a bit confused about this, saying things like, we should give our fellow animals rights. Well, the argument is that they have them. And they're not gifts. The only way to think of rights as gifts is if you think about legal rights.
Mm-hmm.
But moral rights are not gifts. They're kind of embedded into their very being. And the question is not whether they've got them, is whether they've respected them or not. And
yeah,
of course,
absolutely.
as we know, most of our fellow animals' rights are not respected. But it doesn't mean they don't have them.
Yeah, and it falls kind of back into that very similar with the word kindness. It's almost like we're doing them a favour when in reality we're respecting something that was always theirs. I mean, you're not extending any extra benefits, or you're not going out of your way to do these things. These inherent rights always existed. You've just been taught to disregard them.
Yes, indeed. And so I don't know whether you guys have got anything else from this essay, because if not, I want to actually focus on the last.
Yeah, go for it. I mean, I've got the essay on my page, and most people, I suppose, have already listened to it and everything else. But I think the entire thing's gold. So you'd be better off just listening or reading the entire thing. But yeah, feel free to skip.
Yeah, so I'm going to go right to the end, because his final words. This is after 10 years of thinking about it, and the last kind of 3 or 4 years of really evolving the philosophy of veganism. His last 4 words are, "We are the pioneers."
Mm-hmm.
So he recognized that even though they'd done all of that, it was an ongoing kind of process.
Yeah.
And I always thought that was, on the one hand, quite powerful, but also, again, quite modest.
Yeah, of course.
It's not as though, I've sorted you out, lads, off you go. It's kind of like, no, we're the pioneers. We've still got loads to do. But this is where we are right now.
And I would argue that we still are. Because I mean, the huge leaps that they once upon a time made, other than numbers wise and obviously like products wise, in terms of a mental shift, that this evolution, we're further away from it probably. Is
Yeah,
even our own movement, half of us aren't on the same page.
Yeah, I used to have a lecture called "A Low Donald," and I used to say to the audience that they are Donald Watson, because we're still in the pioneer age.
Mm-hmm.
And I used to argue that the job of the existing vegans back then, and we're talking about 15, 20 years ago, I suppose, their job is to lay the foundations of veganism and make it as strong as possible for the people who are coming along afterwards to build on. Right. Now, unfortunately, it's not turned out that way.
Not across the board, but I mean, this is a great opportunity to say, because of people like yourself and Ronnie, we do have sections of this that do have very strong foundations, and there's a small group, many of them in the chat right now, that literally strive to better themselves in this way, shape and form. So it's small and segregated, but they're still there.
Yeah, it's just a shame that some vegans are trying to dig up these foundations, which is
of course.
Yeah, which is a shot. So if we go to the questions, the first one for you, Ronnie, is if I can find it, but well, I know what it is. It's hunting doesn't involve exploitation.
Well, I think I suppose it depends how you view it. If you could say that the people who hunt are exploiting the hunted animals for their own pleasure, I suppose.
A lot of dog exploitation too.
Yeah, and there's obviously the dogs that are used, and of course one thing that people don't realise is there's mass slaughter of these dogs used for hunting. There was some research done some years ago, and they came to the conclusion that here in the UK, 5,000 of the dogs were killed every year. That might be a little bit fewer now because hunting has there's a bit less hunting now than there than there maybe was at the time, but it's still probably in the thousands of these dogs that are killed. So they're definitely
also Ronnie, you've been sabbing for years, and how many times did we see horses bleeding from the mouth?
Oh yes, I mean when you say sabbing for years, I mean I haven't been sabbing for many years, but I mean when I was younger, I did spend quite a few years sabbing. That's true, and oh yes, I mean yes, indeed. And then the question is, what happens to those horses when they become old and they're no longer fit enough to be ridden on the hunt?
Yeah, so those horse individuals are being exploited as vehicles, aren't they?
Well, yeah, absolutely. So there's massive exploitation, and I think that obviously the focus has been very much on the hunted animal in terms of the efforts to get hunting banned, and I think in some ways there hasn't been enough focus on the other animals that are exploited in the course of hunting, as you say, the dogs and the horses.
I'm just having a scroll through. Has anybody else seen any good talking points, folks?
Well, just on that note quickly, just in case they were referring to, say, a single bow hunter in the middle of the woods that didn't use any other animals in any way, shape or form, I would still argue that that's both exploitation and oppression, because you're taking the life of another for no other reason than your own solitary gain, and you're oppressing them. I mean, even if there are no dogs or no horses or no other animals involved, and you're just a guy in the woods, you're both oppressing and exploiting the animal whose life you take, because you're doing it for your own gain, which is exploitation, and you're taking their life, so you're oppressing them. So I would argue that it still falls into those categories regardless of whether the animals are used. But absolutely, yeah, when you think about something like fox hunting, even like drag hunting, think of how many animals are used. Even like they have eagles now that they keep in a box and things that they'll go and let out. The amount of like exploitation that exists within hunting is massive, because that's one of the loopholes. Go out on a drag hunt and let a bird of prey actually take the kill.
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, we're talking about birds that spend most of their life in a cage and then get travelled around on the back of a quad bike in a wooden box in the dark until they're finally given some freedom to go and take the life of another and then put back in the dark again.
Indeed. So we've got Rach and FS bringing us back to the RSPCA issue. The idea of the oxymoron of humane slaughter. Well, that's interesting from a cultural point of view. Humane slaughter is seen as not only possible but common. I mean, that's why you've got people.
It's seen as, you know, the get out clause, isn't it? It's seen as that safety net. It's okay because it's done like this. I mean, it is literally an oxymoron, absolutely, but people don't think that deeply about it. It's just words that provide comfort, like free range.
Well, I mean, I'd asked somebody, you know, what is your definition of humane slaughter? Or, you know, what you're talking
I had someone on the live the other day, actually. I might have it in a screenshot, actually, but they defined humane slaughter as a quick bullet to the head. That was their definition.
Yeah.
So then,
how on earth have you forgotten the compassion and benevolence part?
Well,
that's how they defined it: a quick bullet to the head.
Yeah, people who kind of try and say a bit more than that usually say something like, "Shouldn't involve any pain or discomfort at any stage of the process." So then they're not opposed to the killing, in the same way as Peter Singer's not opposed to the killing.
Yeah, but the killing is the fundamental wrong. You see, this is the thing, and this is what we need to focus on, because no matter how, even if these animals didn't know a thing about it, even if they were lived their life in luxury, and then taken to they didn't know anything about being killed, it would still be fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just for the sake of the hypothetical, let's imagine that the chemicals that ended up in them didn't matter, right? So at birth, they're given some huge kind of heroin injection. So the whole way through life, it's a breeze. They don't know what's going on. They haven't got any idea. Everything is just positive all the time. And then they're euthanized in the same way that a companion animal would be at the vets. And that's how it goes. Everything about that's still wrong.
It's still wrong. I mean, if it were done to a human, it would be wrong. So
absolutely, yeah.
Why is it different to do it to another animal when I mean, we don't, you know, we don't need to. I mean, we don't, you know, we can live perfectly well without any of that, you know.
Yeah.
So
say this though. Say an RSPCA person says to you, or official, and says, "Okay, well, you're the abolitionist. We're the regulators. Mm-hmm. So you get on with trying to abolish this, but in the meantime, we'll try and make it as humane as possible. That's a good thing, surely," they will say to you.
Well, Mike, one argument I'd use with regard to that was with regard to with use of resources. I mean, those animals that they're trying to improve the welfare of animals, but at the end of the day, those animals are still exploited and they're still killed.
Yeah, and I mean, I suppose on that note, you could put it to the RSPCA, for example, because they're tied so much in animal agriculture, but you could put an argument to them that say, hey, you know, the free living beings that you spend a lot of time trying to look after, do you know what the number one threat to them is?
Well, absolutely, it's animal agriculture.
There's the real contradiction about the RSPCA, because they're really honest about their RSPCA assured scheme, as much as we disagree with it and everything else. But there's the actual contradiction. The one thing that they do endorse directly affects the other thing that they look to prevent.
Absolutely. But it's a real contradiction, you know, in terms of other organisations. I remember it's 2 or 3 years ago, going to an open day from one of our kind of nearest a wildlife hospital, and went to their open day. And there was a considerable number of stalls there selling animal products. You know, there was a burger, you know, somebody's selling burgers, somebody's selling, I think, pork baps or something. and yet you've got there that like a wildlife hospital, like free living animals are taken that are injured, they try and yet they are promoting at their open day the number one cause of the destruction of animals living in the wild, which is animal farming, which is completely like, it's just they're saving a few. That's very worthy.
You'd be quite right by making the argument that just by having that open day has caused more damage than they've probably prevented in the year.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, but you see, people don't see that. People don't look at things at any deeper level. It's just a surface thing. Is this injured animal, hedgehog or whatever, bird? Take that animal to the wildlife hospital. And it's great that these places exist. I mean, I quite often take animals to the to the wildlife hospital. But at the end of the day, they're undoing all their good work by promoting and encouraging the consumption of animal products.
It's a bit of a sticking plaster, but then again, you see, conservation, rescue, animal welfare, they're all different versions of sticking plaster. Now, we've got somebody asking to come on who has worked for the RSPCA, so I don't know, want to make a decision about that, Andy?
They're not in the guest requests. I did see their comments, but they didn't actually request.
Oh, okay.
The only people that have guest requested that I've noticed have all been children that I've completely ignored.
Oh, okay. So
if they're still here and want to request, please feel free. But there wasn't a request when they said, because otherwise I'd have seen it and I'd have said, just give us 10 minutes or so, because it wasn't actually that long ago.
Yes. I mean, I know there's an argument, organisations like the RSPCA and indeed, say Compassionate World Farming make the argument, well, people are going to, eat meat anyway, so therefore we need to make that the production of that meat as human as possible. But the thing is that, we need to it's far better to, I would say, to put your resources into educating people to not.
But Ronnie, they're going to say, well, look, that's not our bag, that's your bag, you do that bit.
That is the issue that we've got. The problem is the RSPCA know what their remit is. It's vegans that forget.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that really it's, what we're talking about is how vegans, how we should best use our resources in terms of our.
I would 100% agree with that part.
And should that be
what a waste of time? All those protests outside the RSPCA, when all of those people in all of those numbers could have done some street outreach and told everyone that it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the treatment's like. It doesn't matter what. And because some of those protests got really good numbers, but all they were doing was shouting at the RSPCA. That for the most part, I think on that one Saturday protest that I watched was empty because they weren't at work.
Yeah, and I mean, it's all about use of our resources. I mean, obviously, the number one thing is that, more vegans need to get active in outreach. I suppose it could be argued at least those people are doing something. They're outside there protesting, even if we think that.
It's much better than not doing anything at all. But it's the waste of their energy, is it? But to be better directed.
Because we've got so few numbers in terms of activists, I would say that makes it more important that activism is used as effectively as possible.
It goes back to what Andy said before, though, Ronnie. The fact is, ultimately, we've got an animal welfare movement. We don't really have much of an animal rights movement. And so when an issue of the RSPCA comes up, everybody's ears prick up because they're welfareists as well. Yeah,
that is the problem.
And I think it's also this thing about they're kind of an immediate and kind of visible target, aren't they? The idea of we have to change this system. We have to, the whole system of, consuming animals for food, whether that be animal agriculture. And, let's not forget about the fishes, because by far the greatest victims of human consumption of other animals are animals living in the sea.
Do you think there's any value at all with this argument that it would be good for the public to stop being fooled by the RSPCA?
Only if those same vegans agree that it would be good for the public to stop being fooled by the vegans.
Yeah, I think that you see, it's a question of how many people, if there were no like RSPCA assured labels on animal products, and there were no labels from other schemes as well that try to tell people that these animal products are from higher welfare sources, because it isn't just the RSPCA assured, is it? You've got the Red Tractor scheme, which I think is run by farmers, isn't it? And that's doing something similar. If there were none of those schemes and no animal products were labelled with any of those things, how much difference would that make to the public consumption of animal products? And I think it would make very little difference to it.
Same. And I also think, I mean, because we know how these companies and industries all work, like we touched on a couple of weeks ago when this subject came up, if there was a real concern from like the meat and dairy industry, for example, that taking away that RSPCA assurance would lose them a significant amount of their customer base within a very short period of time after the RSPCA had stepped down or however it worked, they'd have a new group, Green Tractor, whatever it was, that would literally fill that slot and give people comfort and reassurance that they were seeking.
You've actually got that in the USA. You've got these companies that are involved in farming, and they have farms. They have farms that are like highly intensive, and they have farms where the animals have more space and more freedom. And what they'll do is they'll actually criticize themselves because people don't realize it's the same company, and they'll say, "Oh, don't buy this cruelly produced stuff. Buy this humane stuff here that we're, this so-called free range stuff," right? But they're actually attacking themselves. That they're criticizing, a method of production that they themselves employ.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, even if this RSPCA assured campaign is successful in the way that they want it to be, because the speciesism, because the fundamental wrongs never been addressed, people, i.e. the non-vegans, the ones whose minds you're looking to change, will just seek that assurance from somewhere else. So even if there isn't a new Green Tractor company that's stepping to fill the RSPCA's boots, they'll just pay that little bit of extra money for a label that says high welfare.
And we already know about this by what happened with fair trade.
Absolutely, yes.
Is that fair trade was quite strict at one point. Then you started getting things like what is the Rainforest Alliance labels, which was competing. And then you got even things like Nestle, which all vegans would boycott. They have their own version of fair trade now.
Yeah.
So what's happened there indicates what would happen.
Absolutely, 100%. That's what I'm saying. If these companies, if these organisations, they're not stupid. They've got loads of like legal power and marketing power. They'd see this problem coming. Obviously, they're watching this RSPCA situation unfold. And if there was any threat to them in any way, shape or form, like they did some projection and they said, look, without this RSPCA assured package or whatever, we're going to lose 25% of our custom. They'd have a contingency plan in place for that. Because what they actually do for a living isn't at any threat. How they do it is. So all they've got to do is make some suitable changes that tick a few boxes, and they can continue doing what they were doing because nobody has even questioned it.
Well, okay, but let's bring the criteria down a little bit then, because when I ask a few people when the RSPCA campaign started, what they were hoping is they were kind of saying that they hoped that quite a lot of people would go vegan in the absence of the labels. Now they seem to be saying that they think some would, and even if only a few do, that's a good thing.
But would people go vegan by doing outreach in the street or doing a TikTok?
Yeah, you see, there's a couple of things.
The time and money that's been spent on these campaigns for a few people to go vegan, it just doesn't seem worthwhile in any way.
I think it's a diversion from what vegans should really be doing, which is
we're not combating this illusion, are we? That we work hand in hand with the RSPCA. We're perpetuating it.
But I think the other thing, the other kind of aspect of the campaign with regard to the RSPCA is that I think the groups campaigning, against the RSPCA assured, the other thing they want the RSPCA to do is to actually promote plant-based agriculture, to actually promote it, to speak out in favour of it. And I think that's got a little bit more. I mean, if the RSPCA were to do that, I think that would be very good. But it's a question of like
the problem is
chances they're going to do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously, not only is it kind of something that they don't talk about in any way, shape, or form, but also from their perspective, other than free living beings, it's not in their remit to care. Because they care about animals, they don't care about trees and plants and land. And I know that seems really sort of contradictory, but that's how it is. It's not in their remit to promote plant-based farming, because they don't necessarily promote any farming. It's just that animal farming exists, and therefore they have a claim on it to do the best they can, or to at least convince the public that they're doing the best they can. So, I mean, I don't see what their stake in plant-based farming would be.
Well, it would be,
as I mentioned earlier, if they cared about like the effects of animal agriculture on the environment in regards to like their contradiction themselves, then that already be pointed out.
Well, I think they could only do it on the basis that would be better for the, for farmed animals, that there was a move away from animal agriculture, because those farmed animals would no longer be exploited, I suppose, or there can't be any cruelty in animal farming if it doesn't exist, can there?
No.
So there is
that's exactly it. The way, I mean, that really is it. The easiest way for everybody, vegan or non-vegan, to eliminate animal cruelty or animal abuse is to eliminate animal exploitation and animal use.
Oh, absolutely, because because that comes on top of the exploitation.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are symptoms of the disease, right? So the easiest way to solve those is to tackle the disease. Yeah, if you remove animal use from the equation, then animal cruelty removes instantly as a result of that.
Yeah,
Whereas
and I think
animal cruelty still leaves animal use, even if it's successful.
And I think what we need from all these organisations is a focus on outreach, and for them to use their resources to promote outreach. Obviously, in there are various forms of outreach, and of course, another problem with Animal Rising, who are one of the main players in this campaign regarding the RSPCA, is that they don't encourage people to become vegan. They don't use the word vegan in their messaging, in their claims making at all. And so that's whereas the other main organisation involved, the Animal Justice Project, they do encourage people to become vegan. They're a bit different, but Animal Rising certainly don't, and I think that is a big problem.
No, and this might sound like quite a bold statement, but I would argue it's quite hypocritical to claim that the RSPCA mislead the public for money, when, I'm sorry, but that's exactly what you're doing. You are not telling people what you actually supposedly stand for, because you tell the vegan activists one thing and you tell the general public a different thing. So essentially, using that and being consistent, you're also misleading the public to entertain money, because there's no donations if you're abolitionist, but there is donations if you're welfarist. And you know that, which is exactly why you use the marketing ploys that you do.
Yeah, you see, I think this is a problem that you get organisations. I mean, Animal Rising don't encourage veganism, don't encourage people as individuals to become vegan, and I think that's always been my major criticism of them. But even organisations that do, they will kind of also have a welfarist string to their bow, because I think they see that as more likely to bring in donations, and that's why they do it. But once again, that is diverting their resources into something else rather than vegan education.
Yeah. But yeah, it all falls back into meeting the least resistance. And so they're just doing what RSPCA or any of these groups do, and that's appeasing their donors. Sad but true.
There's lots of sadness, lots of truth. I haven't seen any.
Just scroll up and have a quick look. But yeah, the best thing that could have happened with all those protests and all that time, sadly, is just that it was used to do outreach, and especially as the numbers were really good in some of them. And all those people just doing vegan outreach in the street would have probably convinced as many people to go vegan as these campaigns.
Yes, and I'd say, you know, to try to do outreach in their own areas. I mean, there's so many areas of the country where no outreach takes place. I mean, it tends to happen mainly in the centre of big cities, with things like the Cube of Truth and We the Free and these other groups that do the outreach. But there's so many towns, cities, villages where there's no outreach takes place, and we need to take the, you know, vegan message everywhere, don't we? And that means people need to sort of focus a lot more on what they can do in their own area, in the area where they actually live. I mean, I live in a village, and I've just completed delivering leaflets to the whole of my village and to the next village, which is, you know, a smaller village as well, you know, and you know, like certainly here in the UK, there's no reason why pretty much all vegans can't do that. You know, get some leaflets and promoting veganism, and, you know, to deliver them through people's letterboxes. Very, very simple way of spreading the message that you can do just in a little bit of your spare time.
I've been told on Facebook, Ronnie, that that's a federal crime in North America.
To post leaflets?
It maybe they got a different system, haven't they? And it's to do with isn't it to do with their mailboxes belonging to the mail company or something? It's I think that it is. I think there are certainly some places in North America where that's. But then there'd be other ways of doing it. You know, holding information stalls at different events. You know, there'd be plenty of community events. I mean, I do stalls, like I've got one on Saturday at a local carnival where they have a carnival field with stalls where you can kind of you have to pay a little bit. It's not very much, and you know, you can have a stall there, and that's kind of what I'm doing. I'm sure that there's events like that in the USA. There's bound to be where people can, you know, could do outreach. So, you know, it's still possible.
Yeah, absolutely. We have got one question. It'll probably take us all the way through, but it's so I suppose moving forward in the future, what would we do about free living beings, and how far would we extend things like disease control or interference in that regard?
The negative utilitarian question.
Mm-hmm.
It's a difficult one. There was this philosopher called David. What's his name now? Can't remember. Pierce, I think. And he was saying that we should use our godlike powers in order to micromanage every square meter of the earth. And I was thinking, we're not doing a very good job.
Well, I think these are things that I think we in a way we don't need to discuss those things now, because those things are kind of way in the future. You know, we haven't even, you know, we haven't even got a society where, you know, where there's any more than a few percent of the population that are actually vegan. So we need to address that first. We need to educate far more people to become vegan, and then once we've got a situation where, you know, we're the kind of we're in charge, so to speak, right? Then we can start addressing these other issues and deciding what is the best way to do. But that's something for the future. That's something we don't really need to kind of think about now. It's interesting.
Couldn't both be done simultaneously, Ronnie?
Well, that can, if there ever was going to be that kind of, you know, sort of micromanagement, that would only take place in a world that was run by vegans, wouldn't it? Otherwise, that's not going to happen, is it? Yeah. So we've got to achieve that situation first. We've got to achieve a world that's run by vegans first before we can even start thinking about those things.
Yeah, so, I mean, I suppose you could argue that that kind of thing already exists in the forms of like hunting and pesticides and all those sort of stuff. So as the mentality and numbers of vegans change, then those
Yeah, I think
systems will provide alternatives naturally. Yeah.
I think in terms of, I mean, I was probably talking more specifically about what I think that was it David Pearce. I think I was involved in that discussion we had with him, Roger. Wasn't it on that? Was it on the? Was it on? It was on AR Zone, wasn't it? I think
It was, yeah.
Yeah. But you see, but certainly in terms of other, of other forms of, the persecution of free living beings, then obviously that's something that vegans obviously would be opposed to here and now and try to do something about here and now. But until we and until we're the sort of what you might call the prevailing force in society, what we can do about those things is really is kind of really quite limited, isn't it?
Well, the question is even if we could do things, would it be desirable? For example, it might mean completely disrupting an entire ecosystem.
I think the first thing to do is to prevent the harm that humans are actually doing to ecosystems. That's the major problem. It's the harm caused to ecosystems by adverse human impact that we need to prevent first of all before we start thinking about other things. That's what we need to kind of stop doing stuff rather than to think about additional stuff.
But the idea would be to genetically change carnivores, obligate carnivores, into herbivores, and so that means that their prey species, their populations are going to rise.
Yeah, I mean, you're dealing with something tremendously complicated. You're dealing with like millions of years of evolution, where these ecosystems kind of evolved and came into place, and so tinkering about with them could easily do far more harm than good. And I think
my position is I don't think humanity is up for it. I mean, I don't think we've got any track record that suggests that we could make anything resembling a success of it.
Agreed. And I also think, just as Ronnie mentioned just before, it's impossible for us at the moment to look at things like, I don't know, the population control of deer seriously when all of the other problems exist, all of the other factors that are causing this. So for as long as like animal agriculture exists and as long as deforestation exists and all these other things, everything else is kind of fruitless. So you need to actually look at those problems, and you don't know in the future if we could wave that magic sort of magic wand and have a vegan world overnight. We don't know how many of these problems would naturally fix themselves because we're no longer fucking things up. Because that's huge amounts of these problems now that people talk about, whether it's this particular species being overpopulated or this particular species being a threat, and it's almost always because of us. So if we stopped doing all of those things that we do every single day without any regard, who knows what could change?
Yeah,
I think we'll never be able to make a comprehensive decision until we stop doing those things, and we've got a level playing field to say, right, none of these factors are affecting it anymore. What's driving this? Because at the moment, we could never determine those variables, ever.
It's usually something we've done.
So we could.
Like I remember the arguments about so-called rogue elephants and so-called rogue foxes. When you look into the details, it's created by us doing something wrong in the first place.
Absolutely, yes. And until those things stopped, until we stopped doing what we're doing, how could we ever assess the situation properly to determine what's the best route forward? We can't, because we're looking at it completely unevenly.
Well, there's evidence that the so-called rogue foxes, foxes that will, brazenly come in the daytime and kill someone's chickens and that. There's evidence that that's actually caused by hunting, because you'll get a fox that is pursued over a long distance, and that adversely affects the health of that fox. So they take a chance and go after easy prey, so to speak, during the daytime.
Yeah.
rather than hunting at night, which is more difficult because, of course, the chickens
Of
are
course,
not away at
and
night.
not to mention the huge distances they get driven
Yeah.
from their original home,
Yes.
right? Too. So
Yeah.
Yeah, but not only that is if one partner is killed, and
Yes.
then you don't have a situation there where one goes out hunting and one stays with the kids, as it were.
No,
So it means
desperate
that they want
times.
to leave the kids alone, which means that they don't want to do it for very long, and so they go for the so-called easy meat, right, which might be the local chicken farm.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're talking about that, they're only going to be able to really catch the so-called free range ones, aren't they? And so they're shut away at night. And so what will happen? The fox will take a chance in the daytime, because that's when that's available. Although it's more risky in the daytime for them. That's what happens, because if something's preventing them from being able to hunt at night, that's the only option open to them.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine the number of fox families who've been decimated by, first of all, the hunt kills one of the partners, and then because they have to take risks, the other parent gets killed, leaving the kids with no food, right?
And also, it kind of amuses me that you get people complaining about, oh, the fox killed my chickens, and I had someone come to the stall and say that, and I say, well, do you eat chicken? And she said, well, yes, I do. I said, well, look, you don't need to eat chicken. You could be perfectly well on a vegan diet. The fox does. So why are you, when you're eating chicken, why are you complaining that the fox does? You know what I mean? It's just totally hypocritical.
It just means the fox got there first.
There was a very sad video I can remember from a couple of years ago from a group of Sabs where they were doing some set surveying, I think, and they found an old fox den and kind of like dug a little bit away. And I think there was 3 or maybe 4 cub skeletons, which kind of depict exactly what you're talking about. Both parents obviously were killed and never returned.
Yeah, it's going to be the same with the badger cull as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's going to be exactly the same.
And there's news about that today, isn't there?
Well, there's news that I mean, there's big hopes that the Labour government that we're almost virtually certain to have here in the UK after tomorrow was going to put an end to the badger cull, but it seems that's not as clear cut as people hope, that they're going to allow it to continue for a while.
What a surprise.
And I think that the reason for that is because they want the votes of the farmers. Because it's all about votes. I mean, it's a totally unscientific method of combating bovine TB, which is the excuse that was given for the cull starting all those years ago when it did start. One of the main reasons for it was because the Tory government wants to placate the farmers, because
bovine TV wouldn't be an issue in a vegan world, would it?
No.
Well, not at all, no, because the main way, in some ways, the main way of combating the badger cull is to educate people to become vegan, because it's caused by the dairy industry, isn't it? If we didn't have a dairy industry, we wouldn't have a badger cull. But you see, I think that's why, because it's for the same reason that the Tories promoted the badger cull, is because they want the votes of the farmers, and of course now the Labour Party want the votes of the farmers as well. So just before the election, they've kind of watered down. They seem to have watered down their, their opposition to the badger cull.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it's a great way to circle everything back round, that yet again, if you want to avoid the abuse and cruelty of foxes or badgers, the problem is animal use. And the solution to that is veganism. We can look at all these single issues kind of sort of decompartmentalized in their individual way, but the real crux of all of them is animal use. And the solution to that is veganism every single time. And so that,
absolutely. Everything. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. On that, I mean, we've gone 5 minutes over. I mean, I'm more than happy to continue. Just sort of let you know.
Well, I've got to go in a minute anyway myself. So,
No, I think that's a good note to end it on.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Okay.
Yeah, go vegan. That's always a good note. Go vegan. If you are vegan, get out there and do some outreach and educate as many other people to become vegan as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ronnie got his catchphrase in.
Yeah, I have to. Yeah,
It's been ages. I've been waiting for you to drop that in. Actually,
I know. If I don't get it in, I feel bad afterwards.
yeah. Well, on that note, thanks so much, guys, and we'll be back same time next week, and I'll get this on YouTube at some point tomorrow.
Yeah, take care. Speak next week. Cheers, then. Bye bye.
Okay. See you later. Bye bye.